Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. This is a podcast where two book coaches, editors, and besties discuss books not as readers but as writers to draw inspiration from great books and have lots of laughs along the way because writing is more fun with friends. So before we dive into this week, we're going to be talking about the cast of characters in Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan, which is one of the best, strongest, just most moving parts, I think, of this story. The characters, she's just developed such a phenomenal cast. And so we are going to talk all about that in our episode today. But first, it's small talk time, in which I get to ask Dana what she has going on over at Danger Tales, and she can give me all the hot goss of what's going on over there. So tell me, Dana, what's going on?
I want to fall out of frame, like... Oh my gosh. Well, this has nothing to do with Danger Tales, but everything
Tell
to
me
do
anyway.
with me. Right. You know what? I've been having this sort of talk with myself about all the little things, like I think they kind of call micro habits and things that we do that really just make our lives like well-rounded. And I've been thinking about that a lot, of how I'm a person that, I love like quilting. Yes, I love reading, but I do a lot of other things that help with my writing. I love to do like hand stitching and a lot of like things like that. And so here lately, y'all, for this new year, because by the time y'all listen to this, I've been going, I'm learning to watercolor. Listen, y'all.
Yay! I love it so much.
Listen, I low-key don't know what I'm doing. However, it has been so good. It has been so good for just sitting and brainstorming and having my journal nearby and writing out notes and thinking about my stories and trying to get out of my own way, because I have this natural, what I call wing it mentality.
It's one of my favorite things about you.
That listen, me and following directions are just natural adversaries because I think I'm grown,
It's like your relationship to cardboard boxes is like,
oh my gosh, I'm allergic. So it has been so interesting to sort of put myself in a space and starting to like define, like, why am I in that space? Like, I'm not in the space to be doing these big portraits or doing, portraits or big pictures or whatever. I even low-key think I don't like doing landscapes, but you know what? I'm taking a class. I'm going to do what the teacher says. But realizing how relaxing it is and how it puts me in almost like a flow state when it comes to brainstorming and doing ideas, and stepping away and realizing how much like we're on devices, on computers, on phones, and just sitting and making a mess. And I don't even like making messes. I do realize that as well. Like, I don't even like doing splatters because paint is going everywhere. It doesn't make sense to me. Okay. That is probably another topic for another day. But the point is, and so it's just been making me really thankful and giving myself permission to do other things.
Yeah.
While getting the full benefit of those other things, helping my main thing,
Yeah.
And so that has been really good, of like blocking out my calendar, taking this class. Listen, they be going so fast. She be talking about stuff. I don't know what she's saying. I literally... Listen, and then sometimes I'd be like, I guess I'm about to catch that in a replay because I don't know what she's talking about. And but having a lot of fun. And I think this, like, when your hobby is what you do and also what you love, like, you have to be almost like no, not almost, I have to be very intentional, whether it's blocking out the time, like me saying, okay, I'm gonna take a class, so I have to show up, and we have these certain paintings and these certain tools, and I'm just like, okay, Dana, you're gonna follow the directions and show up, and not just, because if I start going into replays, I'm like, then I won't do nothing. I have to be there live. but it's been such a great thing. And so I'm enjoying it a lot. I think it's bringing something else, and it's allowing me to think through topics I want to talk about, like how I what I think about certain things, listening to books. And so it's new in the new year. But I did start it at the end of last year. So it wasn't just a New Year's thing. But I do know that I'm enjoying it. And I'm looking forward to seeing like what happens, because I realize like little things, like how do you hold a brush?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
Like, I mean, you're holding it. But when you start doing all this little, like you doing points and stuff, it's like, wait, how are you holding this brush? And why you got 17 different types of brushes? Right?
Yeah.
And my husband was like, okay, you're going to keep ordering brushes. Rachel, I don't know if it's the brush or if it's me or if I'm not putting enough water, or if I'm putting too much water. Like it's... The options to mess up are many as far as I'm concerned. And I'm just learning how to enjoy it all and feeling really great in the creative space that I'm in. So I know that has nothing to do with anything else, but it does. It has everything to do with it.
Yes, ma'am. Well, and again, it's like, these are all facets of like developing like a healthy creative life, right? Like it's, again, when you do what you love and your favorite hobby for a living, like you have to, that it changes things. It doesn't change the love. It does, like, it's not, but it does change that, like, okay, this is now what I do 8 to 10 hours a day. If you should have better boundaries, you should do it 8 hours a day, but whatever, we're doing it 8 to 10 hours a day. But it means that you also have to be intentional about taking distance from that thing, because like taking steps away is also how you get clarity, right? And so like that, and it's the same thing with like, if you are working on a problem in a writing session and you can't crack it, the answer is not necessarily, and often is not, to sit there for 6 hours just like, trying to just constantly solve that problem and to continue grinding on it. Like you have to get space from those things. And so having activities, especially tactile activities, not screen activities, not like, but things that, you use your hands and your body and you're still engaging with, especially some other kind of creative thing, but in a different way. That is so important for like you will not solve problems by grinding on that one problem that you're stumped on for hours and hours and hours and staying at your desk. It is going to be in the getting away from that problem that like, it's almost like it allows you to get out of your own way, right? Where like your kind of unconscious kind of kicks in a little bit and is able to just sort of like chew on that somewhere in the back of your head, while the front of your head is like occupied with something else. And so I think that especially when you shift into like, this is no longer what you do for a hobby, but it's what you do for a living. That, because when you're doing it for a hobby, you are stealing those hours to get that, right? Like that is like, you're stealing those couple of hours to be able to engage this thing and enjoy it and get into it. But when it shifts to the forefront of how you're spending your time, now you need things away from that thing so that it can continue to move and develop and grow and be healthy, and you can make progress, and you can do that. You can have a healthy creative life. And that's one of those things that shifts. And it's really, really important. And any kind of, all those like tactile creative activities, those are just good for you. Those are things that like, when we live our lives at desks and in front of screens, touching grass, touching paint, touching paper, those are all really, really good things to do.
Yeah, and I don't want to touch paint, but I get it. And I will say, like, blocking out time, you know, I think that is another one of those things. Like I was, and this will be the final thing I'll say on this, but I was having a conversation the other day, and it really hit me how many like micro habits I've sort of like flowed into making really great life choices that just was really small and consistent. And when I look back, it just has been 2 to 3 years of things that are now just natural because it's just things that I've done. And this is another one of those, micro habits I just would love to continue in some capacity. I don't know about splattering paint, but just a little bit. And so, so I'm enjoying it, and look forward to when I paint something that it looks like what it is. And so, just enjoying it. But with that said, with all the mess I'm making over here, what do you have going on over there at Story Cipher?
Oh, also making messes, because that's my specialty. I say that like that's true. Like I'm not a neurotic like mess.
You are very regimented.
Oh man, we're trying to loosen up, man. That's like one of the goals for the new year. Is like, Rachel, you've got to lighten up. It's not going well so far. I gotta be honest. we are a work in progress.
You have a whole. You can do it. I believe in you.
Thank you. Yes, there's still it's still early in the year yet. We get micro habits, right? We stack those over time.
That's right.
But what's quite fun is this sort of goes kind of nicely with what you were talking about, like in sort of a weird tangential way. So in about a week, I'll be doing a workshop session for ProWritingAid. So it's one of their, I think they call them like expert workshops. It's for their like paid community. And I'm going to be walking them through my favorite scene planning method. And my favorite scene planning method is specifically tactile and visual. So the way that and you know this, and if anyone has heard me talk about anything literally ever, like I'm the biggest advocate for writing on paper, working by hand, like where you can, you have 100 million zillion opportunities to work at the computer. So taking the opportunities when you can to work away from the computer is so good for idea generation, for thinking through like the difference between the connections that your mind makes when you're typing versus when you're writing by hand, and really taking advantage of that. And so the way that I like to do scene planning is so first of all, it's very, it's pen and paper oriented, and it's very visual because I am someone who loves diagrams. I like to sort of like, visualize anything and everything that I can is really how I like to work. And so I'm going to be teaching on how I like to plan scenes and how I like to sort of explore the conflict of a scene and generate insight about, what's going on beneath the surface, and finding conflict if you're not 100% sure where that conflict is coming from, especially either in those early stages or if you're in that revision stage where you're like, okay, something's supposed to be happening in the scene, but it's not. The sparks aren't flying. What am I missing, right? So it's just a way to kind of unpack that. So I'm really excited to get to share that. My students in the academy really, really enjoyed it, and I find it fun. So I'm hoping that that the people in the session find it fun as well. Me and my weird ways of doing things. So hopefully it works for someone else out there as well.
They'll love it. They will love it. I mean, it's a great bunch too.
Yeah,
a great group. And so and that's coming up.
That's end of February. Okay. So that'll be next week from when this episode comes out.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into our conversation about characters. And Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. So before we get into our topics, will you give us a summary, please?
Sure. Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan is a second chance romance that begins after the marriage has already ended. Yasmin and Josiah are divorced, but their lives remain deeply intertwined through co-parenting their children and running the restaurant they built together. Both are trying to move forward, yet unresolved grief, emotional avoidance, and years of shared history keep pulling them back into each other's orbit. As therapy, parenting challenges, and long buried feelings surface, the story becomes less about whether they still love each other and more about whether they are capable of choosing each other again.
Excellent. All right. So with that summary in mind, Dana, what are kind of like the overarching topics you want to make sure we hit today in our conversation?
Some of the overarching topics I want to talk about is, of course, our protagonist, Yasmin, when it comes to a portrait of grief, recovery, and even maternal guilt. As a mother, a business owner, and her battle with depression. Also, we have Josiah. I think her depiction of Josiah was so good because it is a little bit of it's like a difference of the approach of having this alpha male character. But Josiah has all the swag and, he listen, he coming through. But we also see his vulnerability. We see him as a father, a friend, and even glimpses of who he was as a husband. And I think she just did such a great job because you're having this really strong man, this strong Black man, and talking about his thoughts and feelings when it comes to counseling and going into therapy, which is something big, just I think as a man in general, but also culturally as a Black man, that I think Kennedy Ryan handled so beautifully. The other thing that I absolutely want to talk about is how their children, Deja and Kasim, they have their own emotional journeys, and they're not just there for comic relief. They're not just there as just like, they have kids, but they are going through some things, and they challenge and support and also are a part of this journey that not Deja, Yasmin and Josiah is. Y'all, it's a lot of people in this book. And you know me with names. But Yasmin and Josiah are going through. And I think it was so beautifully done. Some of the nuances that can happen, like the relationship between mother and daughter and mother and son. And daughter and father and son. And so those things really done beautifully on the page. And the final thing is the overall supporting cast. We kind of hinted at this in last week's episode about, seeing Soledad and Hendrix, the fact that they are the rest of the series, so getting a glimpse at them. But then you have Vashti on Bird, you have Yasmin's mother, you have the community of Skyland. So I think this was done so well. And so those are some of the big things that I would, really like to talk about when it comes to characters, which is rare for us in this, because usually we only talk about the protagonist, but you really cannot have this discussion without bringing in the cast.
Yeah, and I think, the cast did so much. We talked about in plot where there were certain, like, where we didn't have as much external sort of antagonism, or like one overarching external antagonism, but the cast pulled so much of that weight that maybe we didn't see with with an external plot, because we cared. Like, I felt like she was so effective at the emotional resonance and the emotional connection to the story. And so the cast, like, I think that we connected to them so deeply that that was a part of the drive of the story. Like, she did that so well to, we wanted to see Kasim win. We wanted to see Deja and her mom sort of be able to reconcile. And so seeing like the way that she took those characters and they carried the story in such an amazing way, and really, like, for me, that really like drove so much of my investment of like, I want to see these people and I want to see them win. So yeah, I think that her cast work is some of the strongest work that, like, just in this book as a whole. But there's a couple of other things I kind of want to add on to our topics, because there are a few things that she just did so well. Number one, I want to talk about creating characters with history, because she, again, this is like one of those things where it's like she makes it look easy. This is not easy to do. And the thing is like, pretty much every story, unless you're looking at like, I can't remember the name. It was just a TV show, but where you have a bunch of characters who wake up in a pod in space and they've lost all their memory. Barring that kind of concept, you are going to have characters somewhere with history. And so how you do that, and some of the sort of things that she did to really make that history matter and connect us to that history. So number one, creating characters with history. Number two, I want to talk a little bit about dealing with mental health issues, and the way that she did that. And that dovetails really nicely into your sort of like considerations about Yasmin as a character and the way that she brought those things onto the page. And then third, we hinted at this, we talked a little bit about it in plot, but the way that there are no real villains in this story. And I think of that as like a strength in particular, where we have forces of antagonism, but not because anybody's evil, not because anybody is wrong. Like they're all people looking for happiness and looking to find, like their family and their sense of self, and like they're just honest people honestly trying out in the world and bumping into each other along the way. And that's super, super difficult to pull off. But I think she did pull that off. And I think it makes for, which kind of contributes also to the way that the secondary cast is quite lovable, I think, in the story. So with that in mind, do we maybe just want to go ahead and start with our discussion of Yasmin and talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. I want to start this off kind of a little bit like I did the last one, which is, I think, like really, y'all, I got to figure out how I'm going to say this. So I'm going to just say it and then we'll take it from there. Like, I think this is where having a story that is culturally relevant, that this is a Black couple. This is a Black couple who, well, they're not a couple when we meet them, but a Black couple who is doing well for themselves. They're upper middle class, probably a little bit higher than that. They have built this business, like they are doing the thing, right? On paper, they are winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But behind closed doors, they're on the struggle bus a little bit. You know what I'm saying? They're trying to hold it together. And I think, this story about this couple being written by a Black woman, it does a great job of sort of trying to keep that image a little bit intact, but also can show how trying to hold up this image can be a part of the issue. Right. And that's a fine line. It's a fine line when you're talking about that and it's in a mixed company and it's outside of the cultural context. Right. So with that said, I think when you then take that and you put a layer on top of that of talking about mental health, and you're talking about grief, when this experience as a Black person in America is surrounded by grief still, grief and tension and stress. But here you are talking about mental health and depression and therapy and counseling and a lot of these things until probably the past, this past generation have been things that we just did not discuss as a body of people. And listen, do I speak for all Black people? No. But you ask somebody Black, they're going to tell you your girl is right. Okay. So, that's just something that we just shied away from. If it wasn't using the church context or going to talk to your pastor or praying about it, when nobody trying to check for counseling, and now it's a different, it's embraced more, I think, just in general, I think because of what we've gone through as a world in the past, decade. But here to sort of use it in this capacity, you're not just looking at it from a sense of this woman experiencing a lot of grief and experiencing death back to back, and basically her mind and her body just being like essentially all but checking out had it not been for her kids. And then also the flip side of a husband trying to hold it all together while his wife is basically hanging on by a thread. And so this is why when we talked about in plot, coming after that was so important, so that we weren't steeped in that, but the residue of that is what is being addressed, right? The things that weren't said and the things that weren't done and the things that they just never talked about. And so to have someone that when we meet Yasmin is almost back in her bag. Yasmin is almost Yasmin again. Right. Yeah. And that is so important, but she's not all the way there, because the Yasmin that she was before this, it almost it feels as if she can't exist anymore because she doesn't have Josiah.
Mm-hmm.
She has him, but she don't have him, you know?
Yeah.
And so now what we're doing is seeing her kind of getting back into the swing of things,
Yeah.
getting back to being comfortable in her skin,
Mm-hmm.
being back to having enough grace for herself so that grief and joy can coincide.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Kennedy Ryan wrote this, listen, I feel like I want to say she's a bad man, Gemma. She did that. She did it because that is hard to do. And
Yes.
I think that's why you're so invested.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more you see of what was going on and what she's wrestling and how hard she's fighting to get back to a place with being okay with her, being okay with the grief, being okay with the fact that she was not perfect and that she did not do it right. But how can you do grief right?
Yeah.
Right. And so we get that portrayal of her grief, of her recovery, of what she's willing to do to be as whole as she can for her children,
Yeah.
and to be a full contributor to the life that her and Josiah still share.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important. And so this character, if you haven't read the story, I think you're going to want to read it based on what I've just said, because you see all of the layers. And so for her to do it with, style and sass and laughter and hosted and girl and all of her black girl magic, it's like, come on.
Yeah.
And you also can see how that energy and her bringing that was probably a contributor to the things that she experienced. And Kennedy does not shy away from that.
Yeah.
She doesn't shy away when we kind of bump into her happy. She does not shy away when she's in all of her big hair and color and heels and sassiness. And she doesn't shy away from that when it comes to her relationship with her girlfriends, her relationships with her children, her relationship with her ex-husband, and the potential of having moved on and being okay with who she is now. So I could say a whole bunch, but with that said, you see the highs and lows that are done with her coming to the reality of where she is. You also see the highs and lows in the relationship, of course, with Josiah. And you see the highs and lows when it comes to her relationship with her kids, of how she shows up for Kasim and how she is sort of in Kasim is almost like coddling his mom in a way.
Yeah.
And Deja is more of like, in Deja's world a little bit, Yasmin is the villain.
Yeah.
Right? And we watch her sort of like having to wrestle with this without falling back into that pit that she just, like, she's barely on the other side of it. She's not in it.
Yeah.
But it's close enough that it's jumping at the big. She feels the heat on her neck, right?
Yeah.
Like if she doesn't make sure she manage it well. And so we see all of that. And the fact that we see all of that in one story, man.
Yeah.
It's really, really good stuff.
Yeah, I think the way that she handles there's so much here of like, okay, the way that she handles mental health issues. I think in particular, because one of the things you were talking about is like when Yasmin is she's dressed to the nines and she looks amazing and she can feel that she looks amazing. But then the contrast of the way that, like you said, that depression, that pain is like right behind her. We're not in it, but it is right behind us. And the way that the way that those moments can exist together, where she's like, oh yes, like this is me. I know I look good. I feel like me. And still sometimes she'll still have that little bit of doubt or that little moment of like, oh, like, and she's presenting like, yeah, I'm here. But there's that thing in her head that's like, am I? And that is such a, I think that she's so captured. I can't speak for men, but I can speak as like as female, right? Like that's it. And I think it's like a deeply human experience, right? Where we can present, and we are sort of like, we've got the like the face on, and there's parts of us that actually feel that, and that's actually real. And then the other part that's still sort of like at the back of the head, or just the little voices or the little bits and pieces are also still there. And I think that what happens is such a deeply like such a representation of deeply human experience, right? And what that feels like to be, for both of those things to be happening at the same time. That's just like you said, that's not easy to do. Like again, she makes it look easy, but it is absolutely not easy to do, because that is a complex aspect of being a human, or being in grief, being having come out on the worst of the side of depression, right? So many of these things are so complex, and communicating that in prose and action, and right, like that is just not, like that doesn't just like happen, right? And so there's a couple of things here of like, I think because at least I don't know if there's like multiple editions of this book, but at least in the audiobook, right, there's like a little bit of like a content warning at the beginning of like touching on these things, but she's very clear that she did her best to handle it with grace and compassion and empathy, and that maybe most importantly, she did her research, right? She consulted with professionals, she talked to people who've had these experiences. And I think if you're going to deal with mental health issues, I think that's one of the most important things that you can do, is do that research and take the time to like understand it deeply, so that you can represent it well. And I think she really, like, it shows, right, that she did her research and sought to handle it with compassion and empathy and deep understanding. um and one of the ways I think she does this really well is the fact that she uses the contrast between Yasmin's past experiences and her present experiences to help us see where she was, the depth of that grief and the depth of that pain, because there's some after effects, right? Like in the depth of that depression, that's where she asked for the divorce. And now she's sort of like, she's living in the consequences, right, of like of what that did to her and what that meant in her life and in her family. And so that it where we talked about before, where you know mental health and grief and these kind of things can be really difficult to sort of convey, because they're sort of like, they don't have a tangible any, like they're not a monster that is like physicalized. In horror you may very well do that kind of thing, but in contemporary romance it's like it is a thing that's hard to sort of externalize. But that is one of the ways that we get it externalized. It's like we see the effects, and we see her sort of living in the after effects and the aftershocks of the worst of this moment. And that's both, I think, the way that she represents that journey, and also how she helps make that a little bit gentler, which is something you've talked about, where we're not following the story when she's in the very bottom of it. We're seeing her just on the other side of the worst of it. And that kind of, so that it isn't this sort of like super like triggering or going like really deep into the like really like the trenches of it. And I just think that that's what that did, was create, she dealt so graciously with mental health issues, and it made Yasmin such an incredible protagonist, and someone so deeply human and who feels so deeply real, that again, that causes us to lean in and want to see her succeed.
And I totally agree, and I think that also what made the story so successful, because it transcends, right? It transcends the Black experience, the Black woman experience. Like, we all have in some capacity lost something. The degree may differ, of how much we've lost ourselves or found ourselves or struggled with. And so having it depicted this way,
Yeah.
and sort of folding it in this family's experience, it kind of feels like a gift, right? A gift of like, you're letting us in. Like, it feels like, these could be people, and I think that it is a great sort of counterpart to when you were talking about in the episode about it being feeling like a slice of life, but it feels like I know these people,
Yeah.
even whether I've been a part of it or I know somebody who has gone through it, and it made it so that it made her, of course, relatable. You are rooting for her. You want her to be back, and she doesn't shy away from those moments where, like, early on we see she's like, okay, she's getting dressed to go out with her girls, and then she gets to that part of the floor and it like rushes up and you're like, wait a minute, what just happened here? And so her ability to sort of, it's almost like a flip of a switch, but it also helps us to give a sort of tangibleness to the thing that we felt was intangible in plot. Right? It did such a great job. And it kind of makes me pour over and then kind of go into Josiah, because at the same time we see this, but then what she does is add another layer, because the way that each of them handled it and digested it and showed up was different. And that difference becomes the conflict that is the culprit, right? It becomes the antagonistic energy. And what basically happens is almost like love becomes it becomes the enemy, right? You're so close that you almost assume that the other person is feeling what you feel. And that's part of that. And it did sort of make this thing that's intangible feel tangible in a lot of ways. So whereas she sort of almost folded herself, except for caring for the kids, he went into work mode, activity, moving, and so you see this man that just has swag and it just has energy that moves the room. But when he turns to her, it's almost as if there's a part of him that was once fully reserved for her is no longer for her, and she feels it and she knows it, and he feels it and he knows it, and she feels like, I deserve it because I asked for it, and he feels like, you deserve it because you asked for it. And this becomes their tug of war, while at the same time they are showing up, they are parenting, they're running a business, they look so cordial, they look so like they got it together. And I think that part of the storytelling is so yummy, because there is something about when you have characters that their actions and then their words are saying one thing, but their mental is saying something different. And it kind of becomes the culprit of what we talked about in plot, where it almost is leaned on so much that it kind of can turn into a con. But when we talk about the characters, it is a total pro, for this story. And so we see him, deal with vulnerability, how he handles counseling and grief and what he does for his children. And even in those moments of how he is supporting Yasmin and being a very present partner in the raising of their children. But in those moments, you also see how they could have lost that connection, because it's almost as if he was doing the right thing, but the right thing at the wrong time. Like, it's some weird, matrix Rubik's Cube thing going on that he's sort of missing. And it takes him really, he needed the time. He needed to be on the other side in order to get to this place. And if it wouldn't have been for what we'll talk about next, their children, they probably wouldn't have had this second chance. So, yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and like dive in to sort of like springboard into that conversation about the kids and what they add to the story? Because I want to say, I think, and I see this particularly in action stories, but sometimes kids can be almost like the low-hanging fruit to add to a story, right? Where it's like if you want to raise the stakes, and so you like throw a kid in the mix, and now because no, like every person kind of has that instinct of like, wait, don't like, I don't want people to get hurt, but then you see a kid and you're like, oh my god, like it automatically like raises that like ooh thing, right? And it raises the stakes. You have like kind of an innocent that you like the audience wants protected, and we want to make sure they don't get hurt. But what that means is that it can become sort of like it's like almost like set dressing, right? Where it's like now that we like throw kids in the mix, now our stakes are escalated, and so people care more, and they can add some, like you said, kind of like some comedic relief, or they escalate the stakes just because kids naturally do that. And so they can be, again, they can be the low-hanging fruit sometimes when we want to like escalate the stakes on something. This is not the case for Deja and Kasim, right? They are so much their own characters on their own journey, and that's very, very clear. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I was about to say, you go.
Before I take the whole point.
I feel like when it comes to Deja and Kasim, as someone who is in a blended family, like we have a blended family, it can be like rhetoric. Like it just feels like someone says, oh yes, I want to co-parent and what it means to have a blended family and all this. But it's something totally different when you're on the inside. And I think that's sort of like what we're experiencing here. It's like, what happens to kids that were a part of a divorce? What happens when parents are fighting and fussing and they think they're hiding it well and they're not? What is the residue that you sort of leave on your children's existence because of something you thought you handled well? Right. And the reality is they were just trying to, this is when you just trying to listen, you try to put your mask on first before you put the mask on your baby. But here we're seeing like what happens there. How does Kasim sort of absorb that? How does Deja absorb that? How does their relationships with their parents work because of that? It's almost as if they are functioning so well that it makes it hard to understand what's really going on because you're co-parenting so well. And so here what you see is that they have their own journey, but their journeys affect their parents because they're a mirror. They're a mirror of what those kids experience, but also of how well or not well they handle the situations. And you get to see Yasmin and Josiah through how they show up for each other, even when they are having such a hard time between each other, but they still remain a united front. So it's like this thing of like how you can air quote do it right. But you also see how there's just some things that you just can't protect your kids from. And as somebody, with grown kids, like you get it. And it's like, girl, listen. Right. And so it is a whole thing. And here, unlike other stories, we get it. We get, Kasim trying to transition and find who he is and find his footing and, wanting to eat his mom's food, even if it's not really good because he doesn't want her feelings hurt. And you see Deja like hearing certain things and interpreting certain things. And this is kind of a little bit of a squirrel moment, but I always have been the person where I'm always fascinated with how people believe kids should act in certain situations when the reality is they don't have enough lived experience to interpret what we interpret as adults. And here we see that. She just knows you asked for it. And essentially, if we're all gonna be big mad, we're gonna be big mad at you because he wanted this and you didn't. And Yasmin having to be far enough in her journey to be like, I did. And we see that, and I'll say before passing the baton, and we see how the kids then respond to that. Because sometimes that's left off, right? Because we're just concerned about the love interest. But here we get to see how the kids sort of resolve or come on the other side of that, and not just because we see them happily ever after in an epilogue or whatever. We see how they sort of digest this, even down to the dog. Okay, Otis, he should be in there with the kids too, and so it made it feel like this was a living, breathing, still existing kind of story. And
Yeah.
again, I think this is one of the reasons why the story did so well and is still doing well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I kind of want to use that as like an opportunity to sort of like segue into talking about history,
Mm-hmm.
because that really feeds into, I think, like Deja and Kasim's experience, and how, how Josiah and Yasmin sort of came to be where they are, but why, what all of that means to them. And again, what it means to the kids as well, because some of that experience like is shared with the kids. Some of that experience is exclusive to Yasmin and Josiah, right? When they first got married, right, before the kids were around, like they had their own history and their own life. But that also impacts the way that they interact with each other and what the kids do and don't know and understand. And to your point, like they just also have like limited lived experience. And so the way that they're interpreting things, like that's going to be impacted by the amount of experience that they have to date so far. And so I think, one of the things that she does really well, and something that I think I would encourage writers to really pay attention to, is when you're creating characters who have history with one another, especially if we're going to see any of that history on the page, you want to get ultra specific. Like it's the details that really give those memories the legs. It's not just remember that one time, but it's and I pulled out a couple of like really great examples of like, so when I talk about getting ultra specific, I'm talking about Josiah's old, I think it was a Honda, with they had to jerry rig the seatbelts, and the whole thing was like stripped basically from like floor to the top of the ceiling of the car, and they had to find a way to sort of like make the seatbelts work. Their ratty first apartment that was cold with the bad water pressure, right? Like are these are the things that make history feel real, because it's specific, because this is how we as people remember things. There are certain details that stick out to us, or certain aspects of a memory that our brain has like really stuck, has kind of like latched onto, especially when they're shared experiences. Like those are like, we look back on those things. So like an example for me is like my husband and I, our first apartment, we lived in the super small town, and we rented out a basement from a family of 5. So we lived underneath a family of 5. And there was one specific winter where in our basement apartment, we had slugs coming out of the drain. Like, and again, it's like that is like ultra specific to us and our experience, and it's also weird, and we honestly were like, I don't understand how this is happening. But like those are the like, that's how our lives function, right? Like we have ultra specific experiences, and so you don't want to settle for vague history. Again, particularly when you're bringing memories onto the page, you don't want to settle for vague history, but you want to find those ultra specific details that make that history belong to those characters. And so you're looking for not just getting ultra specific, but choosing the details that contribute the most, that tell us the most about who they were back then, that tell us the most about their experience with one another. So for example, talking about their early life is important. Like the relevance of that is that it's providing a contrast to who they are now, right? So when they were early in life, they were broke, but they were wildly in love. Now they're super successful and their relationship is broken, right? And so it's providing that contrast and giving those nice specific details that make it feel very real, but also is giving like it's brought in to illuminate the story, not arbitrarily. And I think that that's one of those ways that you not only create a meaningful history between characters, but then also ensure that it is meaningful to the reader by making sure that what you're giving us is illuminating something about the story that we want to know and need to know right now. So it doesn't feel tangential, like we're like, oh, we're going off on like some other topic that the reader that runs the risk of checking out on.
Yes. And here you have to do it too, because it's a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't get the falling in love aspect, because
Yeah.
that was the falling in love aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to not just like, you want to bring it in, but you also have to be careful of like having just dumps of information, kind of like a
Yep.
brain dump.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to be careful of when you have flashback moments, because this story does have them and
Mm-hmm.
does a really great job of them, and
Yeah.
does it in a way that I would normally not recommend, but she did it well. And so part of that is that it helps us to understand the aspects of their relationship that we wouldn't have been privy to, that helps us
Yeah.
to understand why this relationship is worth fighting for, why it's, you know what I mean? So it is
Yeah.
necessary because of the fact that this is a second chance, but it also did even more work because it was specific.
Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
just this is their history, but this is how we fell in love, and this is
Mm-hmm.
what we feel like we lost, and this is what we feel we question whether we could get it back, and whether
Yeah.
we can have it in this space and time in our lives. And that's what this story explores.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that's like so much of the intentional work of choosing those memories and those details, and when we get them, in ways that are relevant to what's happening right now in the story, so that
Mm-hmm.
it's we are understanding that those memories, it's not just random information. We're understanding it in light of what's happening currently. And that's actually like each one is illuminating the other, so
That's
that
right.
they have, so that we are invested in that information, because we can already see how and why it's important, again, versus being like, I guess maybe this is important. Maybe I'll find out later. Like, I don't know. And so we're not guessing as to why or how it's important. It's very clear because of how it ties into whatever is happening presently, right, in that particular scene or in that particular moment.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of takes me a little bit into the other thing, if it's not like causing you to shift off too soon, because it made me realize, like, when you talk about the secondary cast, part of this that made it so great is the fact that her best friends did not know her before.
Yes.
They did
I
not
was thinking about
know
that too.
her when they were a couple.
Yeah.
Right. And so that helps kind of help with some of those decisions that you make, being that this is a second chance romance and we did not see them together. We get an idea from the stories, and we get an idea based on how they work together now, but we really know based on the conversations that she has with her girlfriends.
Yeah.
And so it's part of that. Like, how do you juggle that, and how do you insert that, and how you keep developing this relationship that's already present?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and kind of just start talking about this secondary cast? Because that was like, as we were talking, that was like a note that I like wrote to myself of like, oh my God, bringing in the like girlfriends, but they are new additions to her life. So that basically what happens is it gives us a little bit of you can't overuse this opportunity where, again, because you can also info dump in dialogue and you should avoid that. But it gives us these little bits of opportunity to get more explanation and more information that Yasmin is not necessarily going to be thinking about, but because these are new additions to her life, they have questions. They still want to know, like, wait, what's going on here, right? And so they can sort of still do a little bit of that, like, stand-in for the reader of creating those opportunities. But also, like, for Yasmin to be able to, like, as a part of her healing journey, to make friends who don't know old Yasmin. They only know this new, that also is kind of a part of her healing of, like, who am I now? And giving her friends that give her the opportunity to be that and figure that out, and who only know who she is now, like, that's just that's another sort of just great, like, nugget of goodness coming from that very specific but very, very small choice to be like, oh, these are new best friends. She hasn't had friends like these before, right? And again, and it raises these questions for her of like, wow, if I had a community like this, if I had these relationships and I had the knowledge I have now, maybe this would have gone differently. But it's setting us, it's also like setting her on that trajectory of, but I do have it now, so I can be that person, so it's just but like it's such a minor choice to be like, oh, best friends are new. They're not old from a long time ago. They're newer additions. It's like the ripple effects that actually has is amazing. That kind of small decision and what you can actually do with a decision that small. So anyway, that was a quick tangent, but talk about the secondary cast.
That one, you just did it. She just did it again. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it was a great decision. It also shows how Yasmin has pockets of joy that does
Yeah.
not it does not connect to her being a wife, a mother, a business owner. It's just because, right? And as a part of her healing process, it also means that we get the opportunity to have the girlfriends to be curious and question on our behalf. Because baby, when Hendrix was going in on how fine Josiah was, baby, we felt the tension, right? Even though Yasmin did not want to go into that. And we started realizing, like, wait a minute, like she wasn't prepared. Like, why is she not prepared to talk about it because she's embarrassed? Is she not prepared to talk about it because there's feelings still there? Is she right? And it helps us to continue to be invested and leaning in. And this is one of those micro moments of conflict, right? That we're seeing that's keeping us on the hook. Because now we want to know, well, what happened? Why do you not want to share with your girls, right? Because it makes it feel really juicy. And so, you know, having those relationships, and then it kind of serves like almost a triple duty, because then we start being curious about them. And how they ended up in a place of needing a new set of friends, or how, you know, how Soledad is handling her husband and her daughters, and how Hendrix is handling this, you know, power career, and now and being in control, and now and having something happen to her that's so intimate that takes her outside of her realm of control. And so these secondary characters show up, and they are very distinct, and they are very real, and they feel like people you know. And if you don't know people like this, you want to. And that turns into a very amazing reader experience. And I believe in sort of pairing this with our conversation last week. This is why it still works. You can have some of those things, but this is why it still works, because you are invested as a reader. And it just honestly just works. And so by the time you add in Vashti, Aunt Bird, I can't remember Yasmin's mother's name. Yasmin's mother. You have Josiah's best friend that was doing the haircut and that he played basketball with, and then you have Yasmin's therapist, and Kasim's therapist, and eventually even Deja was like, everybody else got one, I'm gonna get one too. You know, like it just turned into I really like when you said it in the last episode, like, you know, this slice of life, like it totally is, but in the best possible yummy way, right? That we get to experience the good and the bad, and Josiah, you know, getting the song so Hendrix can hit the dance floor, right? Of what you do for friends and what you do for family, and what it means to live in community and experience something in community. And we even see it to the degree of their Skyland, of people being glad that Yasmin is back, and then missing her, and people that did things like bring her books and look after her from afar, and neighbors that looked after the kids. Like it was just, and I know you're going to talk about this. I think this is one of those things that I love when you talk about universal fantasies, like we talk about Theodora Taylor in romance, of everybody wants that. Everybody wants an existence, you know, to a degree, because, you know, whether we are people or not, but they want people to care about whether you're okay, and whether your kids are okay, and to look after you, and babysit your kids, and look after your kids at the house while you go take care of something after work. And it becomes this thing where, yes, this is a Black couple and children and experience, but it is a shared human experience. And it becomes this thing of like, I want that, you know?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
so amazing. So that is what she does with the supporting cast to
You
me.
know,
Go
what's
ahead.
kind of amazing too. Okay, so I'm gonna make this quick note and then I'll kind of jump over because this actually fits really nicely with this discussion that there aren't like villains in the
Mm-hmm.
story. What we mentioned last week is we talked a little bit just like about, you know, contemporary romance and sort of contrasting things we never got over, as far as some of the things that we see in that story. And one of the things that we loved about Things We Never Got Over was Knock 'Em Out, right? This very vibrant community that we just sort of that you want to be in and that you loved. But what is so interesting to me about this story is that Knock 'Em Out is like sort of like larger than life, right? It's a rom-com community. It's sort of like, you know, it's very like you've got a lot of wacky characters. This community feels like people you would actually like you could really
Real.
know.
Exactly.
They feel like, and again, I think so much of that too is like specific to like we're in rom-com, so everything's like a little bit bigger, a little bit wackier, a little bit like wow. But this is so much like they feel like real people. It doesn't feel like a fictional place that you would escape to, but a real place that you sort of like it has that little feeling of like home that
Mm-hmm.
that like but that realness of home, like what it's really like to know real people. And those people feel deeply real. And that is a different draw in that
Mm-hmm.
universal fantasy, right? And it's like a different but it's like I it's something that I really loved about this story is like these feel like deeply real people. And she just did that so well.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so I just kind of want to like take that opportunity to like talk about the fact that there aren't villains in this story and talk about that as a real strength. So like we already talked about like plots and antagonism and stuff like that, but there's a real like but I also see this as like a real positive, and I love when a story can pull this off because for that same reason so seldom are real humans just purely evil. Like they're
Right.
just like purely bad people. They exist. Those people are real people, you know, and there's crazy stuff out there. But so many of the people that we meet in life, people that, you know, rub us the wrong way or that we disagree with or that are annoying to us or like whatever, like they are not forces of evil. They're just people doing people stuff. And they're just people who are who are also trying to find their way in life, right? And depending on when you caught them and what kind of overlap you have, sometimes that does not gel with you. Um, and so what that means is like when we look at like Vashti, right? She's not this like evil manipulative temptress who's like, ha, I'm gonna steal your man, like ah. And Mark isn't like this evil politician who's like, ah, oh, yeah, like I'm gonna take Yasmin and I'm just here to use her and blah, like, and he, right? They are just people who are trying to do life and to figure it out. And like in the example of Vashti and Mark, right? They're people who are looking for happiness and hope they found it with Sai and Yasmin.
Mm-hmm.
But Sai and Yasmin actually belong to each other. They
Mm-hmm.
belong with each other. And so it just doesn't work out. And while that does diminish the amount of conflict that you have in the story, I love when you can do that because it's so much it's such an honest approach to people and such an honest approach to what it means to be human and exist within communities, which is just that sometimes we bump into like we antagonize each other and sometimes we mean to because you know like Deja, she's mad at her mom and she has beef with her mom and she's kind of taking it out in her ways. Sometimes we mean to because that's sometimes how we treat people, even people we care about.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just life is messy and weird and
Mm-hmm.
we bump into each other. And to be able to pull that off in a story, again, is not that easy because it requires complexity and nuance in your understanding of people and what they are like, and resisting those extremes and instead pulling people towards something that is more real. And I love the way that she did that. And I love that she was able to do it without sort of caricaturizing people,
Mm-hmm.
but letting them be just humans who are trying to figure it out like our protagonists are.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. This you don't see this often, right? It makes me think of the movie Sweet Home Alabama. And then I always was so fascinated by the fact that she could have picked either one of them and been happy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Except she kissed the boy when she was 7 years old and she never stopped loving him, and it just, life happened, but it just, and I think that, to me, that's one of those things about romance that just makes it feel like it could be my story too.
Yeah.
Right? That maybe
Yeah.
I have, right? And I just need to, and she handles that with grace. But we also see that, like, I loved when Yasmin's mother was like, I'm not gonna say what she said, but she kind of pulled him to the side, like, all right, now you know better, kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But it also made it so that you just had a set of really mature people. So it wasn't just some misunderstanding that could have been fixed with a conversation. It wasn't that. And so I think, again, it's like her handling of this covers a multitude of some, like, moments.
Yeah.
That it just made it so that it was well-rounded.
Yeah.
They were all strong characters. You did not have a whole lot of small indiscretions that caused this thing to happen, which really meant that she had to have layers on these people, because it was a fraction at the layers. It wasn't this one little thing that just kind of ballooned. Like, it really did disrupt and just shake up this almost as perfect, if you will, existence that just happened. It just happened. And so I totally agree.
Are there any other points that you want to mention or that we missed that you want to make sure we hit before we wrap today's episode?
No, I really feel like this was one of the strongest aspects of this story. I just do, on so many levels. And we didn't even talk about the good parts. And so there's even more to it. As someone who absolutely loves character development and working on characters, it was just yumminess all over the place.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we didn't say, and I kind of mentioned in passing, this was a nice sized cast.
Yeah.
But you don't feel like it. It does not feel like it. It feels very intimate and very intentional. So that was done extremely well. And you are invested. And I think more than anything, that's what you want your readers to be, invested in getting to the end of the story. Even for all the things that I may feel like are hit or misses from the plot, I didn't stop reading. I've read this book like 5 or 6 times now. And it gets better every time, because I understand what I'm, getting into. But she just does it so well. And so this is one of those places where it shines. And and I just totally enjoyed it. And I think this could be definitely one of the reasons why you pick up this book and study it, for sure.
Definitely. I totally agree. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we haven't even, like, there was so much stuff that we didn't even get a chance to talk about, which is, every book we read, it's like, man, we can spend hours and hours talking about it. We still haven't even just, like, we barely sort of like scratched the surface. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our conversation about characters in Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. We will be back next week with our editor's takes, where we talk about, we have some wrap-up conversation, also talk about, like, the big takeaways when we're thinking about writers, the kind of story you're trying to tell, what you should look out for, what you should, look at more closely. But until then, we will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, sign up for the podcast, leave a review, leave us a comment, visit us at storydeepdive.com. The whole list of things you should do, all of those things. So, so we'll be back next week with our editor's takeaways. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for hanging with us now. And as always, happy writing.